But her friend is nowhere to be seen. Now she walks through her sunken dream to the seat with the clearest view, and she's hooked to the silver screen. But the film is a sad thing for she's lived it 10 times or more. She could spit in the eyes of fools.
Whether you're looking for a Chevy car, truck, or SUV, go see my friends at Apple Chevy in Tinley Park. With over 500 new and used vehicles in stock, they have what you're looking for, and at the lowest price possible. Go to applechevy.com.
To the girl with the mousy hair, but her mommy is yelling no, and her daddy has told her to go. But her friend is nowhere to be seen. Now she walks through her sunken dream to the seat with the clearest view, and she's hooked to the silver screen. But the film is a sad thing for she's lived it 10 times or more. She could spit in the eye of fools if they ask her to focus on sailors fighting in the dance hall.
David Bowie, dead at the age of 69. It's announced. We got the news this morning, right? As we woke up to that news overnight, it was released that by his family that he had passed away after an 18-month battle with cancer in New York City. Greg Kot, the great Chicago Tribune rock critic, is standing by. And, David Bowie is a very, very hard guy, and you did an excellent job in the Trib today about this. He's a very hard act to properly define because the scope is so great, right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, he's a guy who's, talk about genre experimentation, gender experimentation. I mean, he was... if you liked one album, watch out because the next one's going to be completely different. I mean, he was, a chameleon changing styles all the time. He was, I really think he was the first postmodern rock star. I mean, in the past, what I mean by that, the classic blues and country artists in the first couple of generations of rockers, they basically found a style, stuck with it. Bowie was all over the place. He was really experimenting with everything, and everything was on the table. And that really he was hugely influential. Subsequent generations of musicians have really used Bowie as a template for how to conduct their careers.
Deeply influenced, too. If you think about it, what he did is he had certain sounds that he tried to create. There are things that he did, he co-wrote and co-produced that he may have even performed on, but were not his. There was the Mott the Hoople hit that he did, and which sounds just like him, but is because he wrote it and it is that, but it was not him. There's also Iggy Pop. He worked with Iggy Pop on Lust for Life, which has been the theme of this show for many, many, many years. And other things, his touch was in so many different places.
Oh, yeah, that's what I love about Bowie's career is that he was so generous. Once he got a platform of fame, he didn't just use it, for self-aggrandizement. I mean, it was obvious, he loved it, but at the same time, he was using it to elevate his friends and heroes and inspirations. And you just mentioned a couple, he basically resurrected Mott the Hoople's career by giving them All the Young Dudes. It was one of the best songs he had ever
that
written.
era.
And they had also tried to give them Suffragette City. They rejected that one, which was probably in retrospect a little bit of a mistake, but they did okay with All the Young Dudes. Nobody knew who the Velvet Underground or Lou Reed was when Bowie produced Lou Reed's Transformer album and Take a Walk on the Wild Side. I mean, that was his doing. That was Bowie's saxophone solo at the end of that song. Iggy Pop, again, the Stooges,
Queen,
vastly underappreciated band, and Bowie taking Pop under his wing and giving him two of his, those great solo albums, Lust for Life and The Idiot. And Pop sent this amazing tweet today. He's had a long and illustrious career, thanks to Bowie's tutelage in a lot of ways, mentorship. saying he was the light of my life, and for an unsentimental guy like Iggy to say that about some person was pretty unique. So I think I'm glad you brought that up, because I think it's a lovely part of Bowie's legacy was the way that he expanded the careers of so many great artists that otherwise would not have been known had Bowie not drawn attention to them.
There's a great video circulating, or has resurfaced, of Bowie trying to convince, or talk about how he tried to convince MTV to feature more black artists, too, at that time when he felt there wasn't a good representation of them. Just another example of using his platform to help others in the music industry.
I think a lot of that, and Greg, I know you mentioned this in your article today, but I think a lot of that comes from the incredible success that he had with Let's Dance, which was a phenomenal pop record of its day, right in the wheelhouse of that sort of confluence of that new romantic kind of movement plus dance music. And he produced it with Nile Rodgers from Chic. Right. And Nile Rodgers really became, he's one of the great record producers of all time. So it's just a fascinating thing that he dipped his incredible talent down into something that I don't think anybody expected that album when that came out. No. Wouldn't you agree?
No, it was definitely one aspect of it was that he was reaching for the pop charts, but then again collaborating with somebody like Nile Rodgers, who was coming out of the disco world. I mean, you remember? I mean, we're in the home of disco sucks, right?
Yeah.
Quote unquote.
Yeah.
A horrible time in the city in terms of just a divide. A racially, I might add, I think. And, the whole point with Bowie was that, no, these are styles of music that deserve our attention and gratitude. He embraced Donna Summer, Giorgio Moroder, that Euro disco stuff in the 70s in a big way. Luther Vandross, was all over the Young Americans record. Nobody knew who Luther Vandross was. He was this 19 singer, and Bowie took this guy up and said, do 5 songs in the middle of my show. And Vandross was like, everybody's booing me, and what should I do? He said, no, you're doing your thing, man, and keep doing it. And, the next decade, Vandross is one of the biggest R&B stars on the planet. But Bowie, again, taking a chance on something that, rock stars didn't typically do, sort of going that far outside the margins of what rock was considered in that era.
He was so multifaceted, Greg, that as I was reading more and more about him, today, as people were talking about him on social media, I didn't realize he had basically his own internet service, apparently. Before Instagram, YouTube, or Twitter ever existed, he had his BowieNet, where you could get exclusive content and get an email address with Bowie, davidbowie.com or something as your, suffix. I think I mean, he seemed like ahead of his time in that and so many other things.
Yeah, I retweeted somebody today on Twitter, a fan who really put it well, something to the effect of, I really hope, Bowie gets bored of death and comes back, because it was kind of like that one. It was that kind of thing where Bowie was constantly, he was always on to the next thing, because he would have been, he would have died from stasis. That was the worst thing to him, staying pat, doing the same thing over and over again. He would change his set list. There were times where he would stop performing his greatest hits. He formed a band called Tin Machine that nobody seemed to like except Bowie.
Right.
It was just all in the spirit of, I need to keep changing up and I need to keep moving, otherwise I die creatively.
And an artist like Bowie is about, you have to be at that level to be able to get away with that and not be roundly despised for doing it, or
rejected.
Yeah.
I mean, you think about it in this world where we talk about branding and everyone has sort of a personal brand, and he seemed to be changing it in some way. That almost became his brand. This constant change, and multiple personalities, as he put it.
Well, I want to go back to something here. Hold on one second, because I want to play this for you. This is him talking about the internet and technology. And when we're done with this, Greg, you might have already seen or quoted this today. But I will ask you the year in which he said this.
Ruh-roh.
I don't think we've even seen the tip of the iceberg. I think the potential of what the internet is going to do to society, both good and bad, is unimaginable. I think we're actually on the cusp of something exhilarating and terrifying.
Ooh.
2000.
Well,
2000 was the year. And this was way before the that explosion. People were just using the internet as they had AOL. Your computer was still saying, it was welcoming you every morning when you were waking up.
Right.
This is a
Google was founded at the end of '98. That puts it in perspective.
Right. I mean, he's
right.
and he's getting that the world is changing, and what a perfect voice to talk about that, because I think a lot of people, like when I was a kid, I thought he was from the future.
Yeah, he certainly gave off that aura, like, I'm not part of your parents' generation. I may not even be part of your generation. I am what your generation will become. And, that was awe-inspiring to so many people, to see this guy being completely himself, having no regard for what people considered normal or what they considered safe or what they considered correct. And he was moving beyond that, and it's amazing that so many of the innovations he came up with, musical, cultural, the way a man could dress, the whole idea of gender freedom, the whole idea that sexuality could be fluid. I mean, all those things so radical and strange and off-putting when he started doing these kind of things on a mainstream level now seem very normal and very much accepted. Mm-hmm. And I'm not saying he's the only guy that did that, but he certainly played a huge role in it because of the platform he had, that people were paying attention to him.
And it was not an overnight success either. That's something that I think needs to be pointed out. In the 1960s, he struggled, first of all, because he was Davy Jones, in a number of different bands, and he was trying different genres. Blues was, sort of the dominant one through the mid-1960s. And he was having trouble really catching traction. So in his eponymous first album, in which Space Oddity, was the single off of that, and it was released a couple days before the Apollo 11 landing on the moon. Mm-hmm. And it took off as a result of that, I think in part because of that, and it became a theme for the space program, for NASA, essentially. Yeah. Right?
Yeah, well, it's funny because the BBC wouldn't play the track until the Apollo landed safely back on Earth. They thought it was a crass marketing move on Bowie's part, which it probably was.
It was, yeah, no question.
But at the same time, it was an incredibly beautiful, poignant track, and it sort of defined him. Here's Major Tom. Here's the first of my many characters. Many guises that I would be in. And it would be a recurring figure throughout his career. He would come back to it occasionally. It's kind of, hey, what's Major Tom up to these days? In Ashes to Ashes, he was a junkie, and a tragic junkie. So, I mean, these are the kind of things that Bowie was so. He jump-started his career any way he could. He was one of those guys that had something to say and he wanted to be noticed for it. And some people say he was exploitive and he was doing these things strictly for marketing reasons. But then we look back on the music and my God, does it hold up? It's not like it was a trinket or a fad or a gadget. You look at some tracks that were gimmicks 20 years ago and like Kung Fu Fighting sounds really horrible now. It's not like that's running a trend, and it's like you don't want to hear it again.
Everybody was a Kung Fu Fighting.
I think time and they wanted to forget.
Yeah. Now I will say this though, the other thing he touched, and I think he changed, and people don't quite understand this about Saturday Night Live. When Saturday Night Live first went on the air, and they would do the musical act, and then they would do, 2 songs is what they got. Sometimes they got 3, I think, in the first couple seasons. And Lorne Michaels was a genius about this. He wanted them to do a song no one had heard up first, and then do the hit as the second song, so that they would do what they were going to do. But they were pretty standard acts and pretty standard performances. Mm-hmm. Bowie comes along. And Bowie does a thing where he's sitting in he's like standing in a trash can. It's a Ziggy Stardust kind of, get up and the whole thing. And now all of a sudden, avant-garde becomes part of it's an arrow in the quiver of Saturday Night Live for music. And that gets you to all these places and all those bands that Saturday Night Live broke or created, or when Kanye wanted to change what he was doing, where'd he go? He went to Saturday Night Live to do it. It's like, that's all sort of predicated on the success that Bowie had in that genre.
Yeah, he was. You knew he was a provocateur when you booked him for something like that. You knew it was going to be a one-of-a-kind performance that you would talk about for days, just because it was so mind-blowing visually. And I loved that as a kid. Seeing these new Bowie incarnations. I mean, I don't think people now can appreciate just how shocking a lot of this stuff was, especially to people like your parents.
On network television, right?
Oh
like,
my God!
What the hell is that?
Yeah, and that what the hell is that? Is the stuff that changes your world. You get shaken by it when you're at a certain age, and you never forget it. And it influences you and influences how you see the world. And back then, it's interesting that everybody thought the world was going to end because of people like Bowie, and now we realize that this is the world he has created. In a lot of ways, it's a better, more tolerant place because of people like Bowie. He opened people's minds, and I think that was a huge underlining aspect to his entire career.
He's not only has got all these great, wild kinds of, insurgencies and things that he did into the culture, but then he also has one of the most played Christmas songs with Bing Crosby every year on Christmas radio, which is
it's awesome.
Think about that. It just tells you about the talent, his vocal talent and all the rest of that.
Well, and that was coming from a sincere place. He really did admire, crooners like Crosby, who preceded him. This was something that he had a genuine affection for that music. It was in his house, when he was growing up. Similarly for a theatrical performer like Anthony Newley, he, early on he was imitating Anthony Newley with the kind of inflections that he was using on some of his ballads. So this wasn't kind of like, oh, I'm going to go hang out with this, older generation artist to expand my audience. No, it was it came from a place of genuine affection and appreciation for what Crosby had done. The whole idea of using the microphone as an instrument, before Crosby came along, that really wasn't a commonplace thing that pop singers did, but Crosby sort of revolutionized the art of singing. And a guy like Bowie was smart enough to recognize that, decades later, that it had ultimately an influence on the way he approached his music.
Yeah.
What about the final album, Greg? Have you heard about this? Released 2 days before his birthday, a couple days ago. Have you listened to it? There's been a lot of. I guess there's a little bit out there about it, and maybe what statement he's trying to make here. Oddly enough, the review of that album appeared in the paper this morning, and it was online a few days ago when the album came out that I wrote. But I loved it. I thought it was another example of his music being stretched. He was one of those guys who, he walks into a New York City jazz bar a couple of years ago and sees this great jazz quartet, Donnie McCaslin's quartet, and hires them to be his band for this record. So he was exploring new terrain. Even to the very end, he was changing up the game and making a record that didn't sound like any other record in his discography, which is, I think, exactly the way the guy wanted to go out. This was all obviously carefully planned in a lot of ways, because I think David knew that he was going to be making much more music after this. But it was a beautiful statement, a beautiful parting gift from a great artist.
We'll play a little bit of that on the other side. Greg, thanks very much. Appreciate it.
Thank
Great
you,
work
Greg.
in the Tribune today, and the
Absolutely.
Tribune Online, actually, where you've got that story about him and how. This is a shock to everybody. So how quickly you were able to kind of were you already sort of aware that this would be a problem?
I had no idea. I think there's such a carefully guarded secret. I woke up this morning into the news and that he had died, and got right on it. I basically wrote everything from scratch this morning. This is getting really to be a sad duty. Otis Clay died over the weekend.
Right.
Lemmy from Motorhead died a few days ago around Christmas, and these obits are starting to pile up. And this was a really tough one, but we tried to do him justice.
You did.
You did.
Thank
Absolutely.
you, Greg.
Thank you.
Appreciate
it very much, guys. It
All
was
right,
fun talking to you.
Thank
you, Greg.
All right, the Tribune. Go to tribune.com.
So good.
For that today. It's amazing. It's really, really well done. Probably so far the best thing I've read about this all day.